This lecture will cover up all those small topics connected with the twin deficit problem. Okay, so let's start with the concept. We discussed in the last class about balance of payment. We talked about the balance of payment consider two part, current account and capital account. Basically, in current account, we deal with goods, goods, services. And in capital account, we deal with investments and borrowings. Now, understand this thing that when you export the goods and services, then you earn money, earn forex, and when you import the goods and services, then you have to spend this thing. Now, when your spending is more than your earning, obviously you will deal with the problem of deficit, and that is called as current account deficit. That means when your import of goods and services, remittances, transfers, and all those things, donations, etc., when your spending in that is more than your earning, what you are exporting to other countries, this is called as a current account deficit problem. Now, there is one more topic which is called as fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is basically the concept which is dealing with the finances of the government. The government has certain income, the government has certain borrowings. What is the income of the government? Government collects taxes from the people. So this is a major chunk of the income of the government. So when the borrowings of the government, borrowing means borrowing from IMF, borrowing from people, borrowing from the market, when the borrowing of the government is more than the income of the government, again you deal with a problem called as deficit, that is called as fiscal deficit. Now this class is oriented towards a link between both of them, because they together are called as twin deficit. They together are called as twin deficit. That means fiscal deficit and current account deficit are together called as twin deficit. Now, what is the twin deficit? Definition: the current account deficit and fiscal deficit together are known as twin deficit, and often they reinforce each other. High fiscal deficit leads to the high current account deficit. Now, we have to understand this point. Now, the trend in the twin deficit problem, this one represents the fiscal deficit and this one represents the current account deficit. Now, you can see the trend. Most of the times they go together. See, most of the times they go together. That means there is some subtle link between the two. And we need to understand in this lecture what is the relationship between the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. Now, I would once again repeat, fiscal deficit is when the borrowings of the government is more than the earnings of the government. And what is current account deficit? When the, import is more than the export. Deficit is called as current account deficit. Okay. This was in the news, current account to register temporary surplus of $30 billion in 2021. What do you have to extract from these news? You need to extract the current account. What is the current trend? Why this thing is happening? We also need to understand that why the current account surplus is happening. Now, in 2021, this is not a difficult thing to understand. Since the world was affected by COVID, so obviously your import was less and your export was also less. But when your import is more or less than the export, then you can get surplus. Now, only considering the surplus in current account doesn't mean that your economy is doing good. Because since the world economy is affected by COVID, obviously you will import less. Your country is a major importing country because you see the crude oil, you see the technologies, you have to import from other countries. So if you are importing less, you are exporting less, and if your import is lesser than the export, then obviously you can get the surplus in current account. So by only looking towards the current account surplus, can you say that economy is performing well? No, because your economy is a part of globalized economy, and since you are importing less, exporting less, import is less than the export, that means that your economy is getting affected. Okay, so we need to see the two things together, how the things go together. But on a shorter note, if your current account surplus is there, you will have the forex with you, and that forex can be utilized for future exigencies. future contingent challenges which are going to come to you. Okay, so how they're linked together. Now, this bigger circle represents the fiscal deficit for me, and this one represents the current account deficit. Now, how they're linked. If the fiscal deficit is high, the government credibility will go down. And if the government credibility will go down, then obviously the investment will suffer. When the investment is going to suffer, then the government need to borrow at higher rate of interest. And when the government is borrowing at higher rate of interest, obviously the fiscal deficit will be lower, will be higher, sorry. Now, when there is a higher fiscal deficit, automatically the borrowings will increase, and borrowings from international markets will also increase. And when you borrow from the international markets, obviously your currency will decrease, your currency value will decrease. And when your currency value will decrease, the government or the people, say for example, the government is importing oil. If your credibility, the credibility of your currency is low, obviously you will have to give, you know, more dollars. You will have to demand more dollars. When you demand something, your currency value will go down because the market is run by the concept of demand and supply. When your currency or your credibility will go down, when your exports will go down, obviously the demand for your currency will go down. And when you see your currency as compared to international currency, say dollar. So if you want to import the oil, you need the dollars. Now your currency need to be converted into dollar for importing that oil. Since your credibility, your deficit is higher, your imports will be costlier. And when your imports will be costlier, then what it means? That means your currency will depreciate. And when your currency will depreciate, that means for the same import, you will have to pay higher amount of money. That means your more current account deficit will be there. And producers who can sell the products in your market, since they are getting better exchange rate at the international market, so they will be encouraged to export more, and the availability of that product in your market will also decrease. So have you seen that how both are interlinked? Both are interlinked by the concept of twins. A higher fiscal deficit will encourage a higher current account deficit, and a higher current account deficit will automatically encourage a higher fiscal deficit. So this was a very small concept, but a very important concept. So, based on your experience, what you understood through this lecture, you have to answer this question. Considering the twin deficit problem often in the news, which of the following statements are correct? High current account deficit leads to high fiscal deficit. High fiscal deficit leads to high current account deficit. Developing countries must have low fiscal deficit. Developing countries must have low current account deficit. Which of the following statements are correct? And after choosing the correct statement, you also need to explain to me that not only limiting the above question, also explain that how we should reduce the twin deficit problem, which is very important for the economic health of the country. So I hope you understand this topic. Thank you so much for watching this video. We'll meet again.